Europe in the early 20th century believed it had mastered civilization. Its cities blazed with electric light. Its railways stitched continents together. Its factories thundered without pause, producing wealth on a scale humanity had never imagined. Paris hosted world exhibitions celebrating human ingenuity. London commanded the largest empire the earth had ever known. Vienna waltzed in golden concert halls. Berlin marched forward with industrial precision, hungry, ambitious, and restless. The world's greatest powers sat at the same dinner tables, signed the same trade agreements, and shared the same bloodlines through interconnected royal houses. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany was a grandson of Queen Victoria. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia was her grandson too. King George V of Britain shared near-identical features with the Russian emperor. Cousins so alike they were mistaken for twins in photographs. Civilization, it seemed, had grown too sophisticated, too profitable, too intertwined for the catastrophic wars of previous centuries to repeat themselves. This was the beautiful, fatal lie that Europe told itself. Beneath the glittering surface, ancient hatreds fermented. Imperial ambitions competed silently, like pressure building beneath frozen ground. The great powers had divided themselves into two armed camps, separated by suspicion and treaty obligations so tangled they resembled a trap waiting to snap shut. On one side stood the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. On the other, the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Britain. Each alliance had been designed to guarantee security. Each, in the wrong moment, could guarantee destruction. Military planners across the continent had spent decades drafting war schedules with mechanical precision, calculating troop movements, railway timetables, and mobilization sequences to the hour. The German Schlieffen Plan conceived a fight. A two-front war against France and Russia simultaneously required absolute speed. Hesitation was built out of the equation. As the machinery started moving, no human hand could easily stop it. Meanwhile, in the southeast corner of Europe, a region burned. The Balkans, that rugged mountainous peninsula wedged between the crumbling Ottoman Empire and the nervous great powers, had become the most dangerous territory on earth. Ancient peoples pressed against new borders drawn by diplomats who had never walked the land they divided. Slavs, Greeks, Bulgarians, Serbs, Albanians, Turks, Macedonians, each group carrying centuries of grievance, memory, and pride, found themselves caught between dying empires and rising nationalism. The Ottoman Empire, once the supreme force, from Budapest to Baghdad, had been retreating for generations, leaving behind a power vacuum that every surrounding nation desperately wanted to fill. Austro-Hungary, the massive multinational empire ruled from Vienna, watched the Balkan instability with mounting dread, not merely as a distant crisis, but as an existential threat. Within its own borders lived millions of South Slavs, Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, whose growing nationalism threatened to tear the empire apart from within. And beyond the mountains of Serbia, the kingdom that called itself the Piedmont of the Slavic world, the nation that dreamed of uniting all, South Slavic peoples under one banner, waited. The fuse had already been cut. Nobody yet knew precisely when it would be lit. In 1912, the silence shattered. A coalition of Balkan states, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro, united against their common oppressor in what became known as the First Balkan War, they attacked the Ottoman Empire with ferocity and speed that shocked every European capital. Within months, centuries of Ottoman domination across the European continent collapsed. Territories that had flown the crescent for 500 years fell to advancing Balkan armies. Macedonia, Thrace, Albania, entire regions changed hands in the space of weeks. The Ottoman army, vast but structurally decayed, crumbled before the coordinated assault. By the time the fighting paused, the Ottoman Empire had lost nearly all of its European territory. An astonishing geopolitical earthquake felt from Constantinople to London. The Balkans had demonstrated something terrifying, that small, Determined nations could overturn the established order through coordinated military force. But victory breeds its own poison. When the spoils were divided, former allies discovered they had incompatible appetites. Bulgaria, which had sacrificed the most blood in the First Balkan War, believed it deserved the most territory in Macedonia. Serbia and Greece disagreed with violence. Within a year of their triumph over the Ottomans, the victorious allies turned on each other. The Second Balkan War erupted in the summer of 1913. Bulgaria struck first, a desperate, ill-prepared gamble that collapsed almost immediately. Serbia and Greece counterattacked. Romania and the Ottoman Empire seized the opportunity and invaded Bulgaria from additional directions simultaneously. Bulgaria was dismembered. The peace treaties that followed left almost everyone dissatisfied. Serbia emerged enlarged and emboldened, a nation that had nearly doubled its territory in 2 years and burned with expansionist confidence. Austria-Hungary watched Serbia's growth with barely concealed horror. And somewhere in the intricate web of European alliances and Balkan ambitions, the conditions for something far worse than 2 regional wars were quietly assembling themselves. The world did not yet know it was standing at the edge of an abyss. It was still dancing to understand how Europe nearly destroyed itself in 1914. And almost managed to do so 2 years earlier. One must travel backward through decades of accumulated wounds. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was not a nation. It was a negotiation, forged from the ruins of older arrangements and held together by the imperial house of Habsburg, whose dynasty had ruled Central Europe for 6 centuries. Austria-Hungary encompassed 11 major ethnic groups speaking a dozen languages. Across a territory roughly the size of Texas and California combined. Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Slovenes, Croats, Serbs, Romanians, Italians, all bound under one dual crown, all subject to one imperial administration, all increasingly resistant to that arrangement as the 19th century gave way to the 20th. Nationalism, the revolutionary idea that each people deserved their own state, their own language, their own destiny, was spreading across the continent like an intellectual wildfire. For most of Europe's emerging nations, nationalism was a liberating dream. For Austria-Hungary, it was a slow death sentence. Emperor Franz Joseph I had sat upon the Habsburg throne since 1848. He was, by 1912, an elderly man shaped entirely by loss. His wife, the beloved Empress Elizabeth, had been assassinated by an anarchist in 1898. His son and heir, Crown Prince Rudolf, had died in a murder-suicide scandal at Merling in 1889. A tragedy that rocked the empire and left it without a natural succession for decades. His brother Maximilian had been executed in Mexico in 1867 while attempting to rule as emperor of a foreign nation. Franz Joseph had outlived nearly everyone he loved, governed an empire that was slowly fracturing, and carried the weight of a dynasty that had endured for 600 years into a century that increasingly had no room for such arrangements. He was not a cruel man. He was not a stupid man. He was, perhaps, simply a man born too late, trained in the certainties of the 19th century, governing in a world that the 20th century was ruthlessly remaking. The man designated to succeed him was Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He was complicated, a figure who inspired contradictory reactions in almost everyone who encountered him. Gruff, impatient, and socially awkward, he lacked the easy charm that courts expected of future emperors. He had married for love rather than dynastic calculation, choosing Sophie Chotek, a Czech noblewoman considered far below appropriate Habsburg status, and had paid for that choice with daily humiliations orchestrated by the imperial court that refused to fully accept his wife or their children into the family's ceremonial life. The wound never fully healed. It made him simultaneously more human and more bitter. Yet beneath the difficult exterior lived a political thinker with ideas that, had they been implemented, might have altered the course of the 20th century. Entirely Franz Ferdinand believed that Austria-Hungary's only path to survival ran through transformation. He envisioned converting the dual monarchy, which privileged Germans and Hungarians above all other ethnic groups, into a federal empire of equal nations, sometimes called the United States of Greater Austria. Under his imagined structure, Slavic peoples within the empire would receive the same political recognition as Germans and Hungarians, reducing the appeal of external nationalist movements, particularly the Serbian dream of a unified South Slavic state, by giving Slavs within Austria-Hungary something worth preserving. It was a bold, almost radical idea for its time and place, and it made him dangerous enemies. The Serbian nationalist movement understood the threat immediately. A reformed, federated Austria-Hungary that satisfied its Slavic populations would strangle Serbian expansionist ambitions in their cradle. The dream of a greater Serbia, a unified South Slavic state, built by absorbing Austria-Hungary's Slavic territories, required those populations to feel oppressed, alienated, and desperate enough to seek liberation. A generous empire would diffuse that desperation. Franz Ferdinand alive was, paradoxically, a greater obstacle to Serbian nationalism than a repressive Habsburg regime. The man who